Welcome to the channel. I know many of you listen to these videos to relax or fall asleep, and I'm really glad you're here. Before we start today's crime stories, please take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. And if there's any crime story you'd like me to narrate for you, feel free to request it in the comments section. Now let's begin. Story 1. Magdalena Solis was born in the year 1947 in the state of Tamaulipas, which is in northeastern Mexico. The exact town where she was born is not known, but it was a poor part of the country. Her family had very little money. Life was hard for them from the beginning. Her family situation was difficult. Most reports describe her home life as likely dysfunctional. This means there were probably problems in the family, such as arguments, neglect, or a lack of stability and care. The household was not a safe or normal place for a child to grow up. Magdalena did not have the chance to have a typical childhood with toys, school, and friends. Because the family was so poor, Magdalena had to start working at a very young age. She did not get to stay in school for long. Instead, she was put to work on the streets. According to reports, she became a prostitute when she was still very young, likely a teenager. This kind of work is dangerous and often means a person is being taken advantage of. The person who controlled this work was her older brother, Eliezer Solis. Eliezer worked as a pimp. A pimp is someone who manages prostitutes and takes the money they earn. So, from an early age, Magdalena was under the control of her brother. She did what he told her to do. She lived and worked in the streets of larger cities in the region, likely moving around to find customers. Her life was not her own. She had no education, no skills for other work, and no one to protect her or help her find a different path. For years, this was her life. She worked for her brother in the cities. She did not have a normal social life or any real friends outside of this work. She lived in a world of poverty, control, and survival. This continued until the early 1960s. By then, she was a young woman in her mid-teens, around 15 or 16 years old. She had known only hardship and exploitation her entire life. In 1963, her life changed completely. Two brothers named Santos and Cayetano Hernandez came to the city of Monterrey looking for women. The Hernandez brothers were not religious leaders. They were petty scammers, which means they made money by lying to people and tricking them. They had started a small cult in a very poor and isolated village called Yerbabuna, also in Tamaulipas. They told the villagers they were prophets of ancient Inca gods. They promised the poor farmers that if they worshipped them and gave them gifts, the gods would show them where to find hidden treasure in the caves. The plan was working at first, but after a while, the villagers started to doubt the brothers. The brothers needed a new trick to keep control. They decided they needed someone to pretend to be an actual goddess. They went to Monterrey to find a woman who could play this role. They were looking for prostitutes, women who were used to following orders, and who might agree to help with the scam for money or a place to stay. In Monterrey, the Hernandez brothers met Magdalena Solis and her brother Eliezer. Eliezer saw a chance to make money from this new situation. He agreed that Magdalena would go with the Hernandez brothers and help them. Magdalena, who always did what her brother told her, agreed to go. She left the city and traveled with the brothers to the remote village of Yerbabuna. She did not know it yet, but this was the end of her old life on the streets and the beginning of something much darker. When Magdalena Solis arrived in Yerbabuna, the Hernandez brothers put their plan into action. The villagers were already gathered in the caves outside the town for a ritual. The brothers had set up a trick using smoke. They created a cloud of smoke inside the cave, and when it cleared, Magdalena was standing there. The brothers told the villagers that she was not really Magdalena. They said she was the reincarnation of an ancient goddess named Coatlicue, who had come back to life. The villagers, who were poor and uneducated, believed what they saw. At first, Magdalena was just playing a role. She did what the brothers told her to do. But over time, something changed inside her. She began to believe that she truly was a goddess. The drugs that were used in the rituals, like marijuana and peyote, likely affected her mind. She started to have visions and delusions. She believed she had special powers. She believed the gods spoke to her. She stopped taking orders from the Hernandez brothers and started giving orders instead. She took control of the cult completely. Once Magdalena was in charge, the nature of the cult changed. It was no longer just about promises of treasure. Magdalena demanded complete loyalty. She created new rules. One of these rules was that no one could ever leave the cult. She said the gods would be angry if anyone left. The members became afraid of her. Not long after she took control, 2 cult members decided they wanted to leave. They were tired of the rituals and the control. They told some other members of their plan. Those members became afraid. They worried that if the 2 left, they would go to the police and tell everyone what was happening in the caves. So they went to Magdalena and told her about the 2 members who wanted to leave. Magdalena reacted with anger. She announced to the group that the 2 members had betrayed the goddess. She said the gods demanded a punishment. She ordered the other members to kill them. The members did as they were told. They attacked the 2 people who wanted to leave. They beat them badly. They continued beating them until they were dead. This was the first murder committed by the cult. After this killing, Magdalena said they had to perform a ritual with the bodies. She said the gods needed to be fed. She had the members collect the blood from the dead victims. They put the blood into a cup, which they called a chalice. They mixed the human blood with chicken blood and with drugs like marijuana. Magdalena drank from this mixture first. Then she passed the cup to the Hernandez brothers, and then to the other members. She told them that drinking the blood would give them power and connect them to the gods. This first killing did not satisfy Magdalena. It made her want more. She told the cult that the gods were hungry and needed more food. She said the only food the gods could eat was human blood. She also said that she herself needed to drink blood to stay young forever. The cult members were now too afraid to refuse her. Magdalena then created a set ritual for the killings. When she decided someone had to die, the whole cult took part. The victim was always a member who had questioned her or tried to leave. The members would surround the person. They would beat them with their hands and with objects. They would burn them with fire. They would cut them with knives. They did not kill the person quickly. They wanted the person to suffer and to bleed slowly. The victim was left to bleed to death. While the person was dying or just after they died, the members collected the blood in the chalice. They mixed it with chicken blood and drugs. Magdalena drank it. Then, at the very end of the ritual, she would cut open the victim's chest and pull out the heart. This violence continued for 6 straight weeks. During that time, 4 more people were killed in the cave. Their bodies were mutilated. Their hearts were removed. The cult members all took part in the beatings and the blood drinking. They were now fully controlled by Magdalena. They believed she was a real goddess and that they had to do these terrible things or she would have them killed too. In May of 1963, a 14-year-old boy from the area was wandering near the caves at night. His name was Sebastian Guerrero. He saw light coming from one of the caves and heard noises. He was curious, so he went closer to look inside. Through an opening, he saw the cult in the middle of a ritual. He saw them beating a person. He saw them collecting blood. He was terrified by what he saw. He turned and ran away from the cave as fast as he could. Sebastian ran through the night. He ran for 25 kilometers until he reached the nearest town with a police station. That town was called Villagran. He arrived at the police station exhausted and very scared. He told the officers what he had seen. He said there was a group of murderers in a cave who drank human blood. The officers listened, but they did not believe him. His story sounded crazy to them. They thought he was just a frightened boy who had imagined things. They told him to go home. The next morning, one police investigator named Luis Martinez felt sorry for the boy. He decided to help. He told Sebastián that he would walk with him back toward Yerba Buena. He said he would go with him to the cave so Sebastián could show him what he had seen. The two of them left the police station together and started walking toward the cave. They were never seen alive again. When investigator Luis Martinez did not return to the police station that day, his colleagues began to worry. He had said he was going to walk the boy home, but he had not come back. They waited through the night. By the next morning, there was still no sign of either Luis or the boy Sebastián. The police now knew something was very wrong. The police in Villagran realized they needed more help. They could not handle this situation alone. They contacted the Mexican army and asked for their assistance. Soldiers were sent to join the police. Together, they formed a large group of armed men. Their mission was to go to Yerba Buena and find out what had happened to their missing colleague and the boy. On May 31st, 1963, this group of police officers and soldiers arrived in Yerba Buena. They went first to a farm on the edge of the town. There, they found Magdalena Solis and her brother Eliezer. The two of them were under the influence of marijuana. They were not in a clear state of mind. The officers arrested them immediately without any struggle. Some of the cult members, however, did not surrender. A number of them had barricaded themselves inside the cave where the rituals were held. When the police and soldiers approached, these members refused to come out. They began shooting at the authorities. The police and soldiers had no choice but to fire back. A gun battle took place at the entrance of the cave. Several cult members were killed in the shooting. One of the people killed during this battle was Santos Hernandez, one of the two brothers who had started the cult. His brother, Cayetano Hernandez, was not in the cave. He had already been killed days earlier by another cult member. That member, a man named Jesus Rubio, later explained why he had done it. He said he believed that if he took a piece of Cayetano's body, it would protect him from harm. This belief came from the twisted ideas the cult had taught him. Once the shooting stopped and the area was secure, the investigators began their search. Near the farm where Magdalena and Eliezer had been arrested, they made a terrible discovery. They found the bodies of Sebastián Guerrero, the 14-year-old boy, and investigator Luis Martinez. The two bodies had been cut apart. Luis Martinez's heart had been removed from his chest. The cult had killed them after they came too close to the cave. The investigators then turned their attention to the caves themselves. They searched every part of the cave system where the cult had performed their rituals. Inside, they found more horrors. The mutilated bodies of 6 more people were discovered hidden in the caves. These were the remains of the cult members who had been killed during the 6 weeks of violence. In total, authorities now had evidence of at least 8 murders connected to the cult. Magdalena and Eliezer Solis were put on trial for the killings. The main charges against them were for the murders of Sebastián Guerrero and Luis Martinez, because these were the clearest cases with direct evidence. The prosecutors also wanted to charge them for the other 6 murders found in the caves. However, they ran into a problem. The surviving cult members who had taken part in those killings refused to testify against Magdalena and Eliezer. They were still afraid of Magdalena. Even though she was in prison, they would not speak against her. Without their testimony, the government could not prove beyond doubt that Magdalena and Eliezer were directly responsible for those specific deaths. Therefore, Magdalena and Eliezer were convicted only of the 2 murders that could be proven. For these crimes, the judge sentenced each of them to 50 years in prison. The exact prison where they were held is not recorded in most accounts. The other cult members who survived the raid were also put on trial. The judge considered their situations carefully. He noted that most of them were poor and could not read or write. They had been easily tricked by the Hernandez brothers and then controlled by Magdalena through fear and drugs. Because of these reasons, their sentences were lighter. Each of the surviving cult members was given a 30-year prison term. Years passed. Magdalena Solis remained in prison. Some of the former cult members, after serving part of their sentences, were eventually released. Once they were free and no longer under Magdalena's control, some of them began to talk. They gave interviews to reporters who wanted to know what had really happened in the caves of Yerbabuna. These interviews confirmed the terrible details of the blood rituals and the killings. The exact date and place of Magdalena Solis's death are not known. What is known is that she was convicted of murder and spent many years in prison for her role as the leader of the cult. The case became famous in Mexico because of the strange and brutal nature of the crimes, and Magdalena Solis became known by a dark name, the High Priestess of Blood. Story 2. Hamilton Howard Fish was born on May 19, 1870, in Washington, D.C. His father was Randall Fish, who was 75 years old at the time of his birth. His mother was Ellen Frances Howell, who was much younger than her husband. Randall Fish had been a riverboat captain and later worked as a fertilizer manufacturer. Hamilton was the youngest child in the family. He had 3 living siblings, Walter, Annie, and Edwin. There had been another brother named Albert who died before Hamilton was born. Hamilton later chose to call himself Albert, using the name of his dead brother. He also wanted to escape the nickname Ham and Eggs that other children called him. Fish's family had many members with mental health problems. His uncle suffered from mania, which is a condition where a person has extreme highs and lows in mood. One of his brothers was kept in a state mental hospital. A half-brother from his father's first marriage had schizophrenia, which is a serious mental disorder that affects how a person thinks and feels. His sister Annie was described as having a mental affliction. 3 other relatives were also diagnosed with mental illnesses. His mother experienced hallucinations, which means she saw or heard things that were not really there. On October 16, 1875, when Albert was 5 years old, his father died suddenly of a heart attack at a train station in Baltimore. After his father's death, his mother could not take care of all her children alone. She placed Albert in St. John's Orphanage in Washington, D.C. This was a difficult time for the young boy. At the orphanage, the staff frequently beat the children as punishment. Albert was hit many times. Over time, something strange happened inside him. He began to enjoy the physical pain from these beatings. The pain started to give him a strange kind of pleasure. This was the beginning of his interest in pain. In 1880, when Albert was about 10 years old, his mother found a government job and earned enough money to take him out of the orphanage. He went back to live with her, but the years in the orphanage had already changed him. When Albert was 12 years old, in 1882, he met a telegraph boy who became his friend. This older boy introduced him to unusual practices. They drank urine together. They ate feces together. These were things that most people would find disgusting, but Albert did them without hesitation. Around this same time, Albert began visiting public bathhouses. He would spend hours on weekends watching other boys undress. He got pleasure from seeing them without their clothes. In 1890, when Albert was 20 years old, he moved to New York City. He lived there on his own. To make money, he became a male prostitute. He also began to molest young boys. Most of the boys he touched were under 6 years old. He did these things and no one stopped him. In 1898, Albert's mother decided it was time for her son to marry. She arranged a marriage for him with a woman named Anna Mary Hoffman. Anna was 9 years younger than Albert. They got married, and over the years they had 6 children together. Their names were Albert, Anna, Gertrude, Eugene, John, and Henry. To support his family, Albert worked various jobs. He painted houses. He did other manual labor. But he also continued his secret life. In 1903, Albert was arrested for the first time. The crime was grand larceny, which means stealing something valuable. He was found guilty and sent to Sing Sing prison in New York. This was his first experience in prison. At some point during these years, Albert had an experience that affected him deeply. A male lover took him to a wax museum. In the museum, there was a display showing a human penis cut in half. Albert became fascinated by this image. He could not stop thinking about it. He began to have obsessive thoughts about sexual mutilation, which means cutting body parts for sexual pleasure. Around 1910, Albert was working in Wilmington, Delaware. There he met a 19-year-old man named Thomas Bedden. Albert took Bedden to where he was staying. They began a relationship that involved sadomasochism, which means getting pleasure from giving or receiving pain. It was not clear if Bedden agreed to this willingly. In his later confession, Albert suggested that Bedden had intellectual disabilities and may not have fully understood what was happening. After 10 days together, Albert took Bedden to an old farmhouse. Over the next 2 weeks, he tortured the young man. Finally, Albert tied Bedden up and cut off half of his penis. Later, Albert remembered this moment clearly. He said, "I shall never forget his scream or the look he gave me." Albert had planned to kill Bedden, cut up his body, and take the pieces home. But he was afraid the hot weather would make the body smell and draw attention. Instead, he poured peroxide on the wound to clean it. He wrapped it in a handkerchief with Vaseline. He left $10 on the table. He kissed Bedden goodbye. Then he took the first train back to New York. He never found out what happened to Bedden after that. In January 1917, Albert's wife Anna left him. She ran away with a handyman named John Straube, who had been boarding with the family. Anna took almost everything the family owned when she left. Albert was now alone with 6 children to raise by himself. This was very difficult for him. Around this time, Albert began to hear voices in his head. These were auditory hallucinations. He heard things that were not real. At one point, he wrapped himself in a carpet because he believed John the Apostle was telling him to do this. He also started to hurt himself in new ways. He took sewing needles and pushed them into his groin and abdomen. He put many needles inside his own body. Later, when doctors took x-rays of him, they found at least 29 needles stuck in his pelvic area. He also made a paddle with nails sticking out of it. He hit himself with this paddle over and over. He would also put wool soaked in lighter fluid into his anus and set it on fire. He did these things to himself for sexual pleasure. Albert never physically hurt his own children, but he did involve them in his strange behaviors. He encouraged his children and their friends to hit him with the nail-studded paddle. He asked them to spank him. This was part of his need for pain. Around 1919, Albert stabbed a boy in Georgetown. The boy had intellectual disabilities. Albert chose him for this reason. He believed that if he hurt people who were disabled or who were African American, the police would not investigate as carefully. He thought these victims would not be missed as much. In the early 1920s, Albert continued his secret life. He sometimes paid boys to bring other children to him. He collected tools that he called his implements of hell. These were a meat cleaver, a butcher knife, and a small handsaw. He used these tools to torture and kill children. On July 11, 1924, Albert went to Staten Island. He found an 8-year-old girl named Beatrice Keel playing alone on her parents' farm. He offered her money to come with him to look for rhubarb. She was about to go with him when her mother saw them. The mother chased Albert away. Later that same day, Albert went back to the farm and entered the barn. He tried to sleep there, but Beatrice's father found him and made him leave. Albert was 54 years old at this time. He was suffering from psychosis, which means he had lost touch with reality. He believed that God was commanding him to torture and sexually mutilate children. Shortly before he did his worst crime, Albert tried to test his implements of hell on a 10-year-old boy he had been molesting. The boy's name was Cyril Quinn. Cyril and a friend were playing ball on a sidewalk. Albert asked if they had eaten lunch. They said no. He invited them to his apartment for sandwiches. While the two boys were on Albert's bed, they started wrestling. They knocked the mattress off the bed. Underneath the mattress, they saw a knife, a small handsaw, and a meat cleaver. The boys became very frightened and ran out of the apartment. They did not know how close they came to being killed. In February 1930, even though Albert was still married to Anna, he married another woman. Her name was Estella Wilcox. The wedding happened in Waterloo, New York. The marriage lasted only 1 week. Then they divorced. In May 1930, Albert was arrested again. This time it was for sending an obscene letter to a woman. He had found her name in a classified advertisement for a maid. He wrote her a dirty letter. After this arrest, and another one in 1931, he was sent to Bellevue Hospital in New York for observation. Doctors looked at him, but did not keep him there forever. He was released and went back to his life. Albert continued to live in New York City. He worked when he could. He saw his children sometimes. But inside his mind, the voices and strange desires grew stronger. He believed God wanted him to sacrifice children. He thought about this more and more. He looked for opportunities. He waited for the right moment to find a child he could take. In the summer of 1924, Albert Fish was 54 years old. He had been hearing voices in his head for years. He believed God was telling him to sacrifice children. On July 14, 1924, he acted on these voices for the first time with a child. That day, Fish went to Port Richmond on Staten Island. He walked around until he found a group of boys playing catch. One of the boys was 8-year-old Francis McDonald. Fish watched the boys for a while. He had gray hair and a gray mustache. He wore gray clothes. He shuffled when he walked and mumbled to himself. He made strange motions with his hands. Fish approached Francis and talked to him. The other boys later told police that Francis left with an elderly man who had a gray mustache. A neighbor also saw the boy walking with a similar-looking man along a grassy path into some nearby woods. Fish took Francis deep into the woods. Once they were alone, he attacked the boy. He sexually assaulted him. Then he took the boy's own suspenders and strangled him with them. But he did not stop there. He took out a knife and cut the boy's legs and abdomen. He cut deeply into the boy's left hamstring, almost stripping the flesh completely from the bone. Fish later said he had intended to castrate the boy, but heard someone approaching and fled before he could finish. Later that night, Francis had not returned home. His family organized a search. They found his body hanging from a tree in the wooded area near his home. The police investigated, but could not find the killer. They only had the description of a gray man from the witnesses. The case went unsolved. Francis McDonald was buried, and life went on for everyone except his family. But Fish continued his secret life. Nearly 3 years passed. On February 11, 1927, Fish was working as a house painter for a real estate company in Brooklyn. That day, he was working at a location a few miles from where something terrible would happen. In a Brooklyn apartment building, 2 young boys were playing in the hallway. One was 3-year-old Billy Beaton. The other was 4-year-old William Gaffney, who was called Billy. Billy's 12-year-old brother was also there, but then left to go back to his apartment. When he returned, both younger boys were gone. The 12-year-old looked everywhere. He found Billy Beaton on the roof of the apartment building. But Billy Gaffney was not there. When asked what happened to the other boy, little Billy Beaton said, "The bogeyman took him." What happened was that Fish had entered the building. He saw the 2 boys playing. He convinced little Billy Gaffney to come with him. He took the boy onto a trolley car later that day. A motorman named Joseph Meehan was driving the trolley. He saw an old man with a little boy. The boy was not wearing a jacket. He was crying for his mother. The man kept dragging the boy on and off the trolley, trying to quiet him. Meehan would remember this scene years later. Fish took Billy Gaffney to the Riker Avenue dumps. Near the dumps, there was a house that stood alone. No one else was around. Fish took the boy inside. He stripped the boy naked. He tied his hands and his feet. He found a dirty rag on the dump and used it to gag the boy so he could not scream. Then he burned the boy's clothes. He threw his shoes into the dump. He left the boy there alone, tied up and naked, and went home. He returned the next day. When Fish came back, he brought tools with him. He had a homemade cat-o'-nine-tails, which is a whip made with strips of leather. He whipped the boy's bear behind until blood ran down his legs. Then he took a knife. He cut off the boy's ears. He cut off his nose. He slit the boy's mouth from ear to ear, making a huge gash. He gouged out the boy's eyes. The boy was dead by this time. Then Fish stuck his knife into the boy's belly and put his mouth to the wound and drank the blood. Fish had brought potato sacks with him. He gathered stones. He cut the boy's body into pieces. He put some parts in one sack with stones and threw it into a pool of dirty water. He put other parts in another sack and threw that in too. He kept some parts for himself. He took home the front of the boy's body, the part he liked best. He also took the boy's penis and testicles, which he called his monkey and pee-wees. He took the boy's buttocks, which he called his little fat behind. At home, Fish roasted the buttocks in the oven. He made a stew from the ears, nose, pieces of the face, and belly. He added onions, carrots, turnips, celery, salt, and pepper. He thought it was good. He put strips of bacon on each buttock cheek and roasted them. He ate every bit of the meat over about 4 days. He tried to chew the testicles but could not, so he threw them in the toilet. Billy Gaffney's body was never found. More than a year later, on May 25, 1928, Fish was reading the Sunday edition of the New York World newspaper. He saw a classified advertisement that read, "Young man 18 wishes position in country. Edward Budd, 406 West 15th Street." Fish got an idea. On May 28th, Fish went to the Budd family's apartment at 406 West 15th Street in Manhattan. He introduced himself as Frank Howard and said he was a farmer from Farmingdale, New York. He told the family he needed a young man to help him on his farm. He promised to hire Edward and also a friend of Edward's. He said he would send for them in a few days. The family believed him. Fish left but did not return right away. He sent a telegram apologizing and set a new date to come back. On June 3, 1928, Fish returned to the Budd apartment. This time he met Edward's little sister. Her name was Grace Budd. She was 10 years old. She had blonde hair and a sweet face. She sat on Fish's lap and kissed him. In that moment, Fish changed his plan. He later said, "I made up my mind to eat her." Fish quickly invented a new story. He told the parents that his sister was having a birthday party for her children that very afternoon. He said he had forgotten to mention it before. He asked if Grace could come to the party. He promised to bring her home that evening. The parents, Delia and Albert Budd Sr., trusted him. They let Grace go with him. Fish took Grace on a train and then a trolley to the town of Irvington, New York. He led her to an empty house he had already chosen for his next murder. It was called Wisteria Cottage, located at 359 Mountain Road in East Irvington. The house was abandoned. No one lived there. When they arrived, Fish told Grace to wait outside and pick wildflowers. He went inside alone. He went upstairs and took off all his clothes. He did this because he did not want to get her blood on them. When he was completely naked, he went to the window and called her. Then he hid in a closet. Grace came inside and went upstairs. When she saw the naked man, she became very frightened. She began to cry. She tried to run back down the stairs. Fish grabbed her. She kicked and bit and scratched, fighting with all her strength. She said she would tell her mama. Fish choked her with his hands until she stopped breathing. He strangled her to death. Later, Fish told his lawyer something about this moment. He said that while he was kneeling on Grace's chest and strangling her, he had 2 involuntary ejaculations. This meant his body released semen without him controlling it. This showed that the act of killing gave him sexual pleasure. After Grace was dead, Fish took out his knife. He cut her body into small pieces. He put the pieces into a bag to carry home with him. Over the next 9 days, he cooked and ate her entire body. He later wrote that her little buttocks roasted in the oven were sweet and tender. He said it took him 9 days to eat all of her. The Budd family waited for Grace to come home that night. She never returned. They waited and worried. Finally, they went to the police. The police searched, but found no trace of the girl or the man called Frank Howard. Years passed with no answers. In 1930, the police arrested a man named Charles Edward Pope for Grace's disappearance. Pope's estranged wife accused him. Pope spent 108 days in jail, but there was no real evidence against him. On December 22, 1930, he went to trial and was found not guilty. The case went cold again. The Budd family had no hope left. Then in November 1934, 6 years after Grace disappeared, something arrived in the mail at the Budd apartment. It was a letter. The envelope had a small hexagonal emblem with the letters NYPCBA. This stood for the New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association. Delia Budd could not read, so she had her son Edward read the letter to her. The letter was written by Albert Fish. In it, he told a strange story about a friend who went to China and learned to eat human flesh. Then he confessed to taking Grace. He described exactly how he killed her, cut her up, and ate her over 9 days. He said her little ass was roasted in the oven and was sweet and tender. He signed the letter with a false name, but he had written it himself. The letter was the evidence that would finally lead to Albert Fish. He had given the police the information they needed to find him. His own words, written in his own hand, would be his downfall. But that discovery was still to come. The letter that arrived at the Budd apartment in November 1934 was the key that finally opened the case. After Edward Budd read the horrible words to his mother, they knew they had to take it to the police. They brought the letter to the New York City Police Department. Detective William King was assigned to investigate. Detective King read the letter carefully. The person who wrote it knew details about Grace's disappearance that only the real killer would know. The letter described taking her to an empty house in Westchester. It described choking her and cutting up her body. These details had never been released to the public. The letter had to be from the killer. But the letter did not have a return address. It was signed with a fake name. The police needed to find out who sent it. They looked at the envelope carefully. There was a small hexagonal emblem with the letters NYPCBA. Detective King found out what this meant. It stood for the New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association. This was a group for men who worked as private drivers. Detective King went to talk to people at this organization. He found a chauffeur who remembered the stationery. The man said he had taken some of the blank stationery home when he moved out of his rooming house. He left it there by accident. The rooming house was located at 200 East 52nd Street in Manhattan. Detective King went to the rooming house. He talked to the landlady. She described a man who had been living there recently. The man was old, with gray hair. He checked out a few days earlier. But the landlady had important information. She said the man's son sent him money sometimes. She agreed to hold his next check for him. The man would have to come back to get it. Detective King decided to wait. He stayed near the rooming house, watching for the man to return. On December 13, 1934, the man came back. He walked up to the rooming house. Detective King approached him and asked him to come to police headquarters for questioning. The man agreed at first, but then he suddenly pulled out a razor blade and tried to attack. Detective King was faster. He grabbed the man's arm and took the razor away. He arrested him and took him in. The man's name was Albert Fish. He was 64 years old. At the police station, he did not try to deny what he had done. He admitted right away that he killed Grace Budd. He told the police that he originally went to the Budd house to kill her brother Edward. But when little Grace sat on his lap and kissed him, he changed his mind. He decided to take her instead. Fish talked freely about the murder. He described taking her to the empty house in Irvington. He described taking off his clothes. He described choking her to death. He described cutting up her body and eating it over 9 days. He showed no emotion as he told these things. He spoke as if he were talking about ordinary events. After Fish confessed to killing Grace, the police looked into his past. They found the old case of Francis McDonnell from 1924. They brought in witnesses who had seen the gray man on Staten Island. The farmer Hans Keel, who had chased Fish away from his daughter Beatrice in 1924, looked at Fish and said yes, this was the man. Other witnesses also identified him. In March 1935, after his trial for the Budd murder, Fish finally admitted he also killed Francis McDonnell. He described how he strangled the boy with his own suspenders and cut his flesh. The police also looked into the case of Billy Gaffney. The motorman Joseph Meehan saw a picture of Fish in the newspaper. He came forward and said this was the man he saw on the trolley with the crying little boy on February 11, 1927. The description of the boy matched Billy Gaffney. Police learned that Fish was working as a house painter near where Billy was taken that day. Fish later wrote a letter to his lawyer describing in horrible detail what he did to Billy Gaffney. He wrote about whipping the boy, cutting off his ears and nose, gouging out his eyes, drinking his blood, and eating his body. Billy's mother went to Sing Sing to ask Fish about her son, but he refused to speak to her. The police also suspected Fish in other cases. A 12-year-old girl named Yetta Abramovitz was strangled and beaten on a Bronx rooftop in May 1927. A man matching Fish's description had been seen trying to lure girls into dark places that same day. In February 1932, the body of 16-year-old Mary Ellen O'Connor was found mutilated in the woods near a house Fish had been painting in Far Rockaway. Fish never admitted to these murders, but police considered him a suspect. Fish also claimed to have sexually assaulted at least 100 boys over his lifetime. He said he chose boys who were African American or who had disabilities because he believed the police would not investigate those cases fully. He said he had children in every state. No one knows if this was true or just his way of boasting. The trial for the murder of Grace Budd began on March 11, 1935, in White Plains, New York. The judge was Frederick P. Close. The prosecutor was Elbert F. Gallagher, the chief assistant district attorney for Westchester County. Fish's lawyer was James Dempsey, a former prosecutor who had once been the mayor of Peekskill, New York. The trial lasted 10 days. Fish pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. His lawyer argued that Fish was mentally ill and did not know right from wrong. Dempsey presented evidence of Fish's strange behaviors throughout his life. He showed that Fish heard voices from God telling him to kill children. He talked about Fish's history of hurting himself with needles and fire. The defense called several psychiatrists to testify. The main expert was Dr. Frederick Wortham, a well-known psychiatrist. Dr. Wortham spent 2 days on the witness stand. He explained that Fish was obsessed with religion, especially the Bible story where God told Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac. Fish believed that sacrificing a child would be penance for his own sins. Dr. Wortham also explained that Fish associated cannibalism with the Christian ritual of communion, where believers eat bread representing the body of Christ. In Fish's mind, eating children was connected to religious practice. Dr. Wortham concluded that Fish was insane. The prosecutor cross-examined Dr. Wortham. He asked if Fish knew the difference between right and wrong. Dr. Wortham said yes, Fish did know, but his knowledge was twisted by his insane beliefs about religion and atonement. He called it insane knowledge. The defense called 2 more psychiatrists who agreed with Dr. Wortham. The prosecution then called their own witnesses. Dr. Minas Gregory had been in charge of Bellevue Hospital when Fish was observed there in 1930. He said Fish was abnormal but sane. Under cross-examination, Dempsey asked about Fish's sexual perversions. He asked if enjoying eating feces and drinking urine and molesting children meant a person was sane or insane. Dr. Gregory shocked the courtroom by saying these behaviors were common. He said millions of people had the same perversions and were perfectly sane and even successful. The other prosecution doctors gave similar testimony. They said Fish was just a man with unusual tastes, not a man who was insane. Fish's 17-year-old stepdaughter Mary Nicholas also testified. She described how Fish taught her and her brothers and sisters games that involved masochism and touching children inappropriately. This showed the jury that Fish's behaviors affected real children in his own family. During the trial, the prosecutor introduced X-rays taken of Fish's body. These X-rays showed at least 29 needles embedded in his pelvic area and groin. Some of the needles had been there for years. Fish had pushed them into himself and left them there. The X-rays were shown to the jury as evidence of how strange Fish truly was. The jury had to decide if Fish was insane or sane. After hearing all the testimony, they discussed the case. Later, one juror explained what happened. He said none of them actually doubted that Fish was insane. They believed he had serious mental problems. But they felt that what he did to Grace Budd was so terrible that he should be executed anyway. They decided to find him sane, so he would get the death penalty. On March 12, 1935, the jury returned its verdict. They found Albert Fish guilty of murder in the first degree. They found him sane. Judge Close sentenced him to death by electrocution. Fish showed no emotion when he heard the sentence. Fish was sent to Sing Sing prison to wait for his execution. He arrived in March 1935. While waiting, he wrote letters and spoke with his lawyer. He did not seem afraid of dying. He had lived a long life of violence and strange desires. Now it was coming to an end. On January 16, 1936, Albert Fish was led to the electric chair at Sing Sing prison. The time was just after 11 o'clock at night. Witnesses said Fish seemed calm. He reportedly helped the guards place the electrodes on his body. His last words were said to be, "I don't even know why I'm here." The switch was pulled. Electricity surged through Fish's body. It took 2 jolts before he died. Some people later said the needles inside his body might have interfered with the electric current. But prison officials said he died in the same way and same amount of time as other men executed in the chair. At 11:09 p.m., 3 minutes after the first jolt, Albert Fish was pronounced dead. After the execution, Fish's lawyer James Dempsey spoke to reporters. He told them he had something in his possession. It was a final statement Fish had written in the hours before his death. It was several pages of handwritten notes. Dempsey refused to show it to anyone. He said it was the most filthy string of obscenities he had ever read. He said he would never let anyone see it. Fish's body was buried in the Sing Sing prison cemetery. He was 65 years old. The families of his victims had to live with what he had done to their children. Frances McDonald's mother had wondered for years about the gray man who took her son. Now she knew. Billy Gaffney's mother never got her son's body back to bury. She only had Fish's confession describing how he ate her little boy. Grace Budd's family finally knew what happened to their daughter after 6 years of not knowing. The letter Fish sent them gave them the horrible truth. Albert Fish killed at least 3 children that we know for sure. He may have killed more. He may have hurt hundreds of others. But with his death in the electric chair, he could never hurt another child again. Story 3. Juana Dayanara Barraza Sampirio was born on December 27, 1957, in a small, rural town called Epazayucan in the state of Hidalgo, Mexico. This area was north of Mexico City and was mostly farmland. Her family life was very difficult from the start. Her mother's name was Justa Sampirio. Justa had a serious problem with alcohol. When Juana was very young, her mother did something terrible. According to reports, Justa traded Juana to a man in exchange for 3 beers. This man then kept Juana and sexually abused her repeatedly. As a result of this abuse, Juana became pregnant with a son. Juana had 3 other siblings, but one of her brothers died after being hurt in a mugging. Because of this painful childhood, Juana grew up with very strong negative feelings. She came to associate her mother, and women who reminded her of her mother, with pain and neglect. As a young woman, Juana discovered a passion for wrestling. She became involved in lucha libre, which is a very popular style of masked professional wrestling in Mexico. She was strong and athletic. In the wrestling ring, she was known as La Dama del Silencio, which means the Lady of Silence. She performed as a ruda, which is the term for a villain or a bad guy in wrestling. This career gave her an outlet and a way to make a living. Outside of wrestling, Juana had a social life and eventually had children of her own. To support her family, she also worked other jobs, including working as a maid in people's homes. This work gave her a reason to be inside the apartments of others, especially older people who might need help with cleaning. People who knew her did not report anything terribly strange about her behavior, but they knew she had a temper and was a very strong woman. The deep anger from her early life, however, remained inside her. In the late 1990s, older women living alone in Mexico City began to be found dead in their apartments. The way they died was often the same. They had been strangled or hit hard in the head. After they were killed, their homes were robbed. Small items like money, jewelry, or religious medals were taken. The person committing these crimes was Juana Barraza. Her anger toward her mother had grown into a strong hatred for older women. She targeted women who were over 60, many of whom lived by themselves. To her, these women reminded her of the mother who had abandoned and hurt her. Juana used her skills and jobs to carry out the crimes. Because she had worked as a maid, she knew how to talk to older people. She knew they were often lonely and would trust someone who seemed friendly and helpful. She also used her experience as a wrestler. Her body was strong, which made it easy for her to overpower elderly victims. To get inside their homes, Juana used lies and tricks. She would dress in normal clothes and sometimes carry official-looking papers. She would knock on doors and pretend to be a social worker or a government employee. She would tell the elderly women that she was there to help them sign up for welfare programs, pension plans, or other benefits. The victims believed her because she seemed official and kind. They let her into their homes willingly. Once she was inside, the method was always the same. She would wait for the right moment. Then, using her strength, she would attack the woman from behind or quickly subdue her. She strangled some victims with her hands, with cords, or with other items she found in the home. In some cases, she beat them with heavy objects. After the victim was dead, Juana would calmly search the apartment. She took cash, valuables, and anything else she could easily carry and sell later. One of the items she used in at least one killing was a stethoscope. This medical tool helped support her lie about being a healthcare or social worker. It also became a tool for murder. For years, the police were confused. They were looking for a single killer, but the evidence did not fit one simple profile. At first, they thought the killer must be a man because of the strength used in the crimes. Witnesses sometimes reported seeing a large, masculine-looking woman leaving the homes of victims, but this information was not fully understood at the time. The police also chased other leads. At one point, they thought a man dressing as a woman might be responsible and arrested many transgender women and prostitutes, but this did not solve the case. An odd clue also appeared. In the homes of at least 3 victims, police found a copy of the same painting. It was a print of an 18th century artwork called Boy in a Red Waistcoat. The police did not know why this painting was there or if it meant anything, but it was a strange fact that connected some of the crime scenes. Despite the growing number of dead women, the police were slow to admit that a serial killer was at work. They were criticized for not acting faster, but the killings continued. Juana kept finding new victims. Her anger did not fade, and her method stayed the same. Gain trust, enter the home, kill, and steal. On the afternoon of January 25th, 2006, Juana went to an apartment in the Venustiano Carranza area of Mexico City. Inside lived Ana Maria de los Reyes Alfaro, an 82-year-old woman. Juana gained entry, possibly by offering her services as a maid or by pretending to be a social worker. Inside the apartment, something went wrong. Later, Juana would say they argued about payment for cleaning work, but the result was the same as before. Juana took out a stethoscope and used it to strangle Ana Maria. After the killing, Juana began to leave the apartment. But this time, she was not quick enough. Someone in the building had heard strange noises or seen something suspicious. The police were called. As Juana walked out of the building, officers were arriving. They saw a woman who matched the description of a large, strong woman with short blonde hair and a facial mole. They stopped her. When they searched her, they found the stethoscope. They also found pension forms and an identification card that said she was a social worker. Juana Barraza was taken into police custody right there, fleeing the scene of her final murder. After the police arrested Juana Barraza outside the apartment building, they took her to the station. They had the stethoscope, the fake social worker ID, and the pension forms she was carrying. These items matched what witnesses had described seeing at other murder scenes over the years. The first thing the police did was take Juana's fingerprints. They ran these prints through their system to check them against the unsolved cases of murdered elderly women. The results came back quickly. Her fingerprints matched prints found inside the apartments of at least 10 different murder victims. This was strong physical evidence that linked her directly to the crimes. When questioned, Juana did not try to hide everything. She admitted to killing Ana Maria de los Reyes Alfaro, the 82-year-old woman in whose building she had just been caught. She told the police that she had been working as a maid for Ana Maria and that they had argued about payment. She said the argument made her angry, and she strangled the woman with the stethoscope. However, she denied killing any of the other women the police asked her about. The arrest shocked the people of Mexico City. For years, the media and the public had called the unknown killer La Mataviejitas, which means the old lady killer. Most people assumed the killer was a man, perhaps a man who dressed as a woman to gain entry to the homes. To find out that the killer was a 48-year-old woman, a former professional wrestler and a mother, was unexpected. But when the police showed pictures of Juana, witnesses from previous crime scenes said she looked like the large, strong woman with short hair they had seen leaving the homes of victims. The investigation moved forward based on the evidence. Prosecutors reviewed each of the murders attributed to La Mataviejitas. They focused on the cases where Juana's fingerprints had been found or where the method of killing matched the one used on Ana Maria. In the spring of 2008, Juana Dayanara Barraza Sampirio went on trial in a Mexico City court. The prosecution presented a strong case. They argued that Juana was responsible for many deaths over several years. They showed the fingerprint evidence and the items found on her when she was arrested. They brought in witnesses who had seen her near the victims' homes. The prosecution claimed she was a psychopath who felt no remorse for her actions, and that she killed the elderly women because she associated them with the mother who had abused her. Juana sat in the courtroom and listened to the evidence. She continued to admit only to the killing of Ana Maria Alfaro. She said she did not commit the other murders. The trial lasted for several weeks, and the jury considered all the facts. On March 31, 2008, the verdict was read. The court found Juana Barraza guilty on 16 separate counts of murder. She was also found guilty of aggravated burglary for stealing from the homes of her victims. The judge then sentenced her to prison. The sentence was 759 years. Because Mexican law states that a person cannot serve more than 60 years in prison, even if given a longer sentence, Juana will effectively spend the rest of her life behind bars. After the trial ended, the authorities officially closed the investigation into the La Mataviejitas murders. Even though more than 30 deaths of elderly women remained unsolved, they believed Juana was responsible for the pattern of killings, and the case was considered finished. Juana Barraza was sent to a women's prison in Mexico. Inside, she found a new routine. She began working as a gym instructor, using the strength she had developed as a wrestler. She also started selling tacos to visitors and prison staff to earn money, which she sent to her family. During her time in prison, reports state that she got married and later divorced. For the victims' families, there was a sense of closure knowing the killer was caught and would not hurt anyone else. For Juana, her life of wrestling, crime, and anger ended in a prison cell, where she would remain for the rest of her days. The woman known as La Dama del Silencio in the wrestling ring would forever be known to the world as La Mataviejitas, the killer of old ladies. Story 4. Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo was born on November 1st, 1962, in the city of Miami, in the state of Florida. His mother, Delia Aurora Gonzalez, was only 15 years old when he was born. She was an immigrant who had come to the United States from Cuba. Over the years, Delia had 3 more children, and each child had a different father. When Adolfo was still very young, his mother's first husband died. After this, Delia moved with her children to San Juan, which is a city in Puerto Rico. It was there that she got married again. As a boy, Adolfo was raised in the Catholic religion. He was baptized in a church and served as an altar boy, which meant he helped the priest during Mass. But his life was not only about the Catholic Church. His mother was interested in other kinds of spiritual practices. She would take trips to the country of Haiti, and she brought young Adolfo with her. In Haiti, he was introduced to the religion of Vodou, which is very different from Catholicism. When Adolfo was about 10 years old, in 1972, the family moved back to Miami. Not long after they returned, his stepfather passed away. The family was left with some money after his death. As a teenager, Adolfo began to take an interest in another religion called Palo Mayombe. This religion comes from Africa and is practiced in some parts of the Caribbean. It involves the use of rituals and the sacrifice of animals. Adolfo did not just learn about it from books. He became an apprentice, or a kind of student, to a local man who practiced this religion. This man taught him the rituals. Adolfo's mother got married for a 3rd time. This new stepfather was involved in 2 things. He practiced Palo Mayombe, and he also sold illegal drugs. This meant that both of these things were now a normal part of Adolfo's home life. During his teenage years, Adolfo and his mother had some trouble with the law. They were arrested several times for small crimes like stealing from shops, vandalism, and theft. Despite these problems, Adolfo managed to finish high school. After graduating, he tried to go to a prep school to continue his education, but he was expelled and did not finish. When he became a young man, Adolfo decided to leave Miami. He moved to Mexico City, which is the capital of Mexico. In Mexico City, he met 3 men who would become very close to him and follow him. Their names were Martin Quintana, Jorge Montes, and Omar Aria. Together, they started a business. They told people they could cast magic spells that would bring good luck, money, and protection. The business was very successful. Many people paid them for these services. The rituals they performed for clients were expensive and involved killing animals like chickens, goats, and snakes. Sometimes they even used more unusual animals like zebras or lion cubs. Many of his best clients were rich drug dealers. These men were used to violence, and they enjoyed watching the bloody rituals that Adolfo performed. He also attracted other wealthy people from Mexican society. Among these new clients were several high-ranking police officers who were corrupt. These officers introduced Adolfo to even more powerful criminals who ran the big drug cartels in the city. As his rituals became more intense, Adolfo decided he needed more powerful objects for his magic. He used a large iron pot called a nana, which he believed held spirits. To make the spirits stronger, he started to raid graveyards. He would dig up human bones and put them into his pot. But soon, Adolfo and his followers began to believe that old bones from graves were not enough. They thought that the spirit in the pot would be much more powerful if it came from a person who was killed on purpose, just for the ritual. They believed a live human sacrifice would give them the strongest magic of all. As Adolfo Constanzo's reputation grew, so did his belief in his own magical powers. He became convinced that the protection spells and good luck rituals he performed were the reason the drug cartels were so successful. He approached one of the powerful families he knew, the Calzadas, who were deep in the drug trade. He demanded that they take him on as a full business partner. He wanted a real share of their profits, not just payment for his spells. The Calzadas refused his demand. Soon after this refusal, 7 members of the Calzada family disappeared. They had been taken by Constanzo and his followers. When their bodies were later found, they had been horrifically mutilated. Fingers, toes, ears, and even brains had been cut from their bodies. In one case, the victim's entire spine had been removed. Constanzo and his group believed these body parts were powerful additions to their magic cauldron. Despite the danger, Constanzo continued to build his network. He became close friends with a new group of drug traffickers, 2 brothers named Elio and Serafin Hernandez. Around this same time, he met a young woman named Sarah Aldretti. She was a college student who at first was simply interested in his magic, but she quickly became deeply involved in the cult. Constanzo was drawn to her and made her his second in command. His followers began to call him El Padrino, which means the Godfather, and they called Sarah La Madrina, or the Godmother. While Constanzo focused on leading the cult and performing rituals, Sarah would supervise the other followers, especially when he was away transporting marijuana across the border into the United States. In 1988, Constanzo moved his base of operations to a remote property outside the city of Matamoros, in Mexico, near the border with Texas. It was a small, isolated house on a piece of land called Rancho Santa Elena. The ranch was perfect for his activities. It was quiet and private, with no close neighbors. Here, he could carry out his rituals without being seen. He also used the ranch as a hiding place for large shipments of cocaine and marijuana that were waiting to be smuggled into the U.S. The killings became more frequent at the ranch. Some of the victims were rivals in the drug business. Others were just innocent people who had the bad luck to cross the cult's path. One victim was a Mexican cowboy who happened to be on the ranch's land. Constanzo and his men tied him to a tree and killed him as part of a ritual. The bodies were buried in shallow graves right there on the ranch. On the night of March 13, 1989, a group of Constanzo's men, including some of the Hernandez brothers, went into the city of Matamoros to have fun. They were driving a pickup truck. In the early hours of the morning, they saw a young man walking alone. His name was Mark Kilroy. He was a 21-year-old American student from the University of Texas. He was in Matamoros on his spring break vacation with friends. He and his friends had been to a bar, and Mark was walking back to the U.S. border crossing when the men in the truck saw him. The men jumped out of the truck. One of them pulled out a shotgun and forced Mark into the vehicle. They drove him straight to Rancho Santa Elena. When they arrived, Constanzo was waiting. He was excited because Mark was a strong, healthy American student. Constanzo believed that such a person would have a very powerful brain, perfect for his most important ritual yet. Mark was held at the ranch for about 12 hours. At some point, he tried to run away, but he did not get far. Constanzo caught him. He then killed Mark with a single, powerful blow to the back of the neck using a machete. After the murder, Constanzo and his followers performed a ritual. They cut Mark's body open and removed his brain. They placed the brain into the nana, the magic cauldron, because they believed it was the most powerful part of him. Mark's body was then buried in a shallow grave at the ranch with the other victims. For a few weeks, it seemed like no one would find out. Mark Kilroy's disappearance caused a huge search effort from American authorities, but no trace of him was found. However, the investigation put pressure on Mexican police. In April 1989, police arrested 4 of Constanzo's followers on separate drug charges. Among those arrested were Elio Hernandez and his brother, Serafin. Under questioning, one of the men began to talk. He told the police about a strange ranch in the desert where terrible things happened. He mentioned a cult and a man named Adolfo Constanzo. The police drove to Rancho Santa Elena. At first, the property looked abandoned, but when they searched the main house, they made a horrifying discovery. In a small, shack-like building, they found Constanzo's nana. It was a large iron pot. Inside, along with blood and other items, was a human brain. They also found a human skull and a boiled black cat. Outside, using farm equipment, the police began to dig. They did not have to dig for long. They found body after body. In total, they dug up the mutilated remains of 15 people. One of them was later identified as Mark Kilroy. The police now knew they were looking for a group of ritual killers. A massive manhunt for Adolfo Constanzo and Sarah already began. After the police found the bodies at Rancho Santa Elena, they knew they had to find Adolfo Constanzo quickly. The news of the discovery spread fast. The Mexican police set up roadblocks and searched for him all over the country. But Constanzo and 4 of his closest followers had already fled the area. They drove hundreds of miles south to Mexico City. They believed they could hide in the huge city where Constanzo had first started his business. With him were his follower Martin Quintana, a young man named Alvaro de Leon, who was known as El Dubi, and 2 others. Sarah Aldrete was also with them. They rented a small apartment in a busy neighborhood in Mexico City. For a few days, they stayed inside, trying not to draw any attention. They did not know that the police were already searching for them in the city. But on May 6, 1989, something happened that they could not control. In an apartment nearby, a man who sold drugs was having an argument with someone. The argument became very loud, and the neighbors heard it. They called the police to report a disturbance. 2 police officers went to the building to check on the noise complaint. They went to the wrong floor by mistake. As they walked down the hallway, they passed by the apartment where Constanzo was hiding. Constanzo and his followers saw the police officers through the peephole in the door. Constanzo immediately became very scared. He was wrong. He believed the police had found him. He did not wait to find out. He grabbed a machine gun, opened the door, and started shooting at the officers in the hallway. The 2 officers were caught by surprise. One of them was hit and killed instantly. The other was wounded but managed to run outside and call for help on his radio. Very quickly, the area around the apartment building was surrounded by dozens of police officers. They set up a perimeter and waited. Inside the apartment, Constanzo knew there was no way out. He looked at his followers. He told them that he would not be taken to prison. He then handed his machine gun to Alvaro de Leon, El Dubi. He gave him a direct order. He told Alvaro to shoot him and Martin Quintana. Alvaro did as he was told. He opened fire, killing Constanzo and Quintana right there in the apartment. When the police finally stormed the apartment, they found Constanzo and Quintana dead on the floor. They immediately arrested Alvaro de Leon and Sarah Aldrete, who were still in the apartment. The two other followers who had fled to Mexico City with them were also caught soon after. With Constanzo dead, the police could now focus on bringing his followers to justice. A full investigation was launched. The police gathered evidence from the ranch, from the Mexico City apartment, and from the testimonies of the arrested cult members. They were able to link the group to at least 15 murders, including the murder of Mark Kilroy. The case became very famous in both Mexico and the United States. In total, 14 members of the cult were arrested and formally charged with crimes. These charges included murder, drug trafficking, and obstructing justice. The trials took place in Mexico. Sarah Aldrete, who had been Constanzo's second-in-command, was found guilty of multiple murders. Elio Hernandez and his brother Serafin Hernandez were also convicted for their roles in the killings. All three were sentenced to long prison terms of over 60 years each. Alvaro de Leon, the young man who had followed Constanzo's final order to shoot him, was given a sentence of 30 years in prison. Adolfo Constanzo himself was never tried for his crimes because he was dead. His body was claimed by his mother, Delia Gonzalez. The case against the cult was closed. For the families of the victims, the arrests and convictions brought some sense of justice, though it could not bring their loved ones back. The body of Mark Kilroy was returned to his family in the United States, who finally had answers about what had happened to their son after he vanished during spring break. The case of Adolfo Constanzo and his cult was closed, but the horror of what they did at Rancho Santa Elena would not be forgotten. Story 5. Marcelo Mario Sagen was born in Argentina in the year 1965. He grew up in the country, and as a young man, people gave him the nickname El Turco. Not much is widely known about his very early childhood, but his life as an adult was marked by two separate families and a pattern of breaking the law. As an adult, Sagen married two different women. This is called bigamy, which means being married to two people at the same time, and it is against the law. He had a total of 8 children. With his first wife, he had 5 sons and 3 daughters. With his second wife, he also had children. The two families lived only a few blocks away from each other in the city of Córdoba. It was reported that both wives knew about each other. Sagen committed his first known violent crime when he was 19 years old. On September 9, 1985, in a place called Pilar, he attacked a young woman who was on a road. He came up from behind her, grabbed her, and dragged her to an empty piece of land nearby. There, he raped her. He did not get away with it. Someone caught him in the act, or very soon after. He was arrested, taken to court, and found guilty of the crime. The judge sentenced him to 6 years in prison. However, he did not serve the full 6 years. He was released after spending only 4 years behind bars. After getting out of prison, Sagen began to attack women again. Starting in 1991, he continued committing these violent acts for several years. Then, on September 8, 1999, he committed another crime. He robbed a pizzeria and raped a girl in the La Canada neighborhood. For this, he was arrested and sent back to prison. This time, he was sentenced to 5.5 years. But because of a law in Argentina at the time, known as the 2-by-1 law, his time in prison was calculated in a way that let him out early. He was freed in the year 2002. After his release from prison in 2002, Marcelo Mario Sagen did not stop his violent behavior. Very soon after he was free, he began to attack women again. He continued to do this for the next 2 years, up until the end of 2004. Sagen had a specific way of committing his crimes, which is called a modus operandi. He chose his victims carefully. He only attacked women who were short in height and who were young, usually between the ages of 17 and 25. He would always approach them from behind. He would grab a woman with his right arm, holding her tightly so she could not move. In his left hand, he held a gun. He would press the gun against her to threaten her. He would tell his victims that if they looked at his face, he would hurt them. He also said that if they did exactly what he said, nothing bad would happen to them. This lie was a trick to make them cooperate out of fear. After grabbing a woman, he would force her to walk with him. He made her walk many blocks away from where he first took her. He did not care if there were other people on the street. He would march her to an empty lot or a piece of wasteland, a place that was quiet and hidden. There, he would rape her. When he was finished, he would not just let her go. He would rob her. He took all her valuable things like money, jewelry, or a purse. Then he would run away, leaving the victim alone and hurt. Between the years 1991 and 2004, Sagen carried out about 80 separate attacks. In some of these attacks, he raped more than one woman at the same time. In total, at least 93 women officially reported that he had raped them. The real number was believed to be much higher, perhaps 2 or 3 times that amount, because many victims were too afraid to go to the police. Because the attacks happened so often, young women in the city of Cordoba became very scared. By 2002, rumors started to spread. Girls would not walk alone on the path near Sarmiento Park that led to the National University. They were afraid the rapist would grab them there. The police had many reports from different victims over many years. At first, they treated each attack as a separate case. Different judges worked on different reports. Because of this, no one realized for a long time that all the attacks were the work of one man. In 2004, something happened that would finally make the authorities connect all the cases. One of the victims, who called herself Anna, wrote an email about what happened to her. In the email, she explained that when she reported the crime, the police told her she was not the first victim. Anna sent this email to many people, and it spread quickly across the internet and through the city. Her message warned other women to be careful. She said they should not trust the police to protect them. She gave advice to scream, to fall to the ground, or to run into a building if a man grabbed them from behind. This email caused public pressure on the police and the government to finally catch the criminal. The public pressure from the email written by the victim, Anna, forced the authorities to take stronger action. In September of 2004, a prosecutor named Ugarte took charge of all the cases. He began to look at all the old police reports from the past years. He saw that many similar attacks happened between 1991 and 1997 in a neighborhood called San Vicente and the areas around it. Then, the attacks stopped for a while. They started again in 1999 and continued until the year 2000. After that, there was another pause, and then they began again in 2002. Prosecutor Ugarte made a logical conclusion from this pattern. He believed the attacker had been in prison during the times when the attack stopped. This meant the man they were looking for was someone who had been in prison between 1997 and 1999, and again between 2000 and 2002. The police made a list of all men who fit this description. Marcelo Mario Sagen was one of the names on that list. The police needed evidence to connect Sagen to the crimes. They had DNA samples taken from the semen left on the victims. They needed to compare this DNA to Sagen's. The police went to speak with one of his wives, Zulma Villalon. She agreed to help. She allowed them to take a blood sample from one of her children. Because a child shares DNA with its father, this could give them a partial match. She also gave them a comb and a toothbrush that belonged to her husband. These items contained his hair and skin cells. When the police tested the DNA from the comb and toothbrush in a laboratory, it was a perfect match to the semen samples from the crime scenes. They had found their man. On December 23, 2004, the police obtained a search warrant and raided one of Sagen's homes in the Villa Urquiza neighborhood. However, Sagen was not there. He had heard that the police were getting close and had run away. For 5 days, he was able to hide. Then, on December 28th, the police received a tip. A man who had been in prison with Sajin called to tell them where he was hiding. Sajin was in a house in a small town called Teopugio. The police went there immediately. When they arrived, they surrounded the house. Sajin realized he was trapped and could not escape. He did not want to be arrested and go back to prison. He took out an 11.25 caliber pistol he had with him and shot himself in the head. He was still alive when the police found him. They rushed him to the municipal emergency hospital in the city of Córdoba. His injuries were very severe. He stayed in the hospital for 2 days but never recovered. On December 30th, 2004, Marcelo Mario Sajin died from his gunshot wound. When the mayor of Córdoba, Luis Juez, learned that Sajin had been caught and was dying, he spoke to the public. He said it was a great relief for the people of the city to know that the most wanted criminal was no longer a threat. Later, Sajin's wife, Zulma, spoke to the media. She apologized to the victims and their families on behalf of her husband. She said she had not known what he was doing and asked people not to hold a grudge against her or her children for the crimes he had committed. The case was closed not with a trial, but with the death of the criminal himself. Story 6. Theodore Robert Bundy was born on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. He was born at a home for unmarried mothers. His mother's name was Eleanor Louise Cowell. For the first few years of his life, the identity of his biological father was not known. Louise later said she had been involved with a man named Jack Worthington, but he left her before the baby was born. To avoid the shame of having a child outside of marriage, Louise's family made a decision. They decided that Louise would pretend to be Ted's older sister. Ted's grandparents, Samuel and Eleanor Cowell, would raise him as their own son. So, for the first few years of his life, Ted believed his grandparents were his parents and his mother was his sister. The family lived in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Ted's grandfather, Samuel Cowell, was a difficult man. In interviews years later, family members described him as a bully. They said he was angry and violent. He was known to beat his wife and his dog. He reportedly threw his own daughter, Julia, down a flight of stairs for sleeping too late. He would sometimes talk to people who were not there. Ted's grandmother, Eleanor, was a timid woman. She was afraid to leave her house. She suffered from depression and had to get electric shock treatments to try to feel better. However, some people who knew the family later said these stories about Samuel were exaggerated and that he was actually a fine man. It is hard to know the full truth. In 1950, when Ted was 4 years old, his mother Louise decided to leave Philadelphia. She and Ted moved to Tacoma, Washington, to live with relatives. A year later, in 1951, Louise met a man named Johnny Culpepper Bundy at a church social event. Johnny was a hospital cook. They got married later that year. Johnny officially adopted Ted, and Ted's last name was changed from Cowell to Bundy. Johnny and Louise went on to have 4 more children together. Johnny tried to be a good father. He took Ted on camping trips and family outings. But Ted always remained distant from him. Later, Ted would complain to people that Johnny was not his real father, that he was not very smart, and that he did not earn enough money. As a young child, Ted showed some strange behaviors that people later remembered. His aunt, Julia, who was still a child herself at the time, recalled waking up from a nap once to find herself surrounded by kitchen knives. 3-year-old Ted was standing nearby, smiling. A neighbor in Tacoma named Sandy Holt said Ted was a mean-spirited kid. She claimed he enjoyed causing fear and pain. According to her, he once caught a stray cat, hung it from a clothesline in his backyard, and set it on fire. She also said he would take younger children from the neighborhood into the woods, make them take their clothes off, and scare them so badly that they would scream loudly enough to be heard for blocks. Ted was also known to dig traps in the ground that could hurt people who stepped in them. Ted's memories of his own childhood varied. He told some people that he was a loner as a teenager because he didn't understand other people. He said he didn't know what made people want to be friends with each other. Some classmates in junior high remembered him being teased a lot, but by the time he got to Woodrow Wilson High School in Tacoma, things were different. His classmates there said he was well known and well liked. He was not a star athlete, but he enjoyed downhill skiing. He would steal ski equipment and use fake tickets to get on the ski lifts. He was arrested at least twice as a teenager on suspicion of stealing cars and burglary, but because he was a minor, those records were later wiped clean. Ted found out the truth about his real parentage at some point. He gave different stories about how he found out. He told one girlfriend that a cousin showed him his birth certificate and called him a bastard. He told writers that he found the document himself. He was very angry at his mother for lying to him and making him discover the truth on his own. After high school in 1965, Ted went to the University of Puget Sound for a year. Then he transferred to the University of Washington in Seattle to study Chinese. In 1967, he met a fellow student who became very important in his life. In many books, she is called Stephanie Brooks. Ted fell deeply in love with her. He later described her as the only woman he ever truly loved. In early 1968, Ted dropped out of college. He worked a series of low-paying jobs. He also volunteered for political campaigns, including Nelson Rockefeller's run for president. Stephanie graduated in the spring of 1968 and moved away to San Francisco. Ted visited her later that year. But soon after, Stephanie ended their relationship. She told him she thought he was not mature enough and did not have enough ambition. This breakup was a huge blow to Ted. He was devastated. He started traveling. He went to Colorado, then to Arkansas and Philadelphia to visit family. He briefly enrolled at Temple University in Philadelphia. He spent a lot of time in New York City, where he started looking at pornography. He became very interested in violent pornographic stories. It was also around this time that he likely discovered his true parentage by finding his original birth record in Vermont. In the fall of 1969, Ted moved back to Washington State. He met a woman named Elizabeth Klopfer. She was a single mother with a young daughter named Molly. Elizabeth worked as a secretary at the University of Washington. They started a relationship that would last for many years, even after he was first arrested. Ted became a father figure to little Molly. He was in her life from when she was 3 until she was 10 years old. Years later, as an adult, Molly wrote about things Ted did to her during those years. She described him hitting her, putting her in danger of drowning, and touching her in sexually inappropriate ways, pretending it was an accident or a game. In 1970, Ted re-enrolled at the University of Washington. This time, he was very focused. He studied psychology and became a very good student. His professors liked him. In 1971, he got a job at a suicide hotline center in Seattle. There, he met and worked with a woman named Enrule, and was a former police officer who wanted to become a crime writer. She liked Ted very much. She thought he was kind, caring, and easy to talk to. She saw nothing wrong with him at all. Ted graduated from the University of Washington in 1972. He then got involved in politics again, working for the re-election campaign of Washington's governor. He was good at the job. He was seen as smart and hard-working. After the election, he was appointed to a crime prevention committee in Seattle. In early 1973, he was accepted into law school, even though his test scores were not great. He got in because important people wrote strong letters of recommendation for him. That summer, Ted was in California for political work. He contacted Stephanie Brooks, the woman who had broken up with him years before. She was amazed by how much he had changed. He seemed serious, professional, and successful. They started dating again. He was also still dating Elizabeth Klopfer in Seattle. Neither woman knew about the other. Ted entered law school in the fall of 1973. He continued to see Stephanie, and they even talked about getting married. Then, in January 1974, Ted suddenly stopped all contact with Stephanie. He would not answer her calls or letters. When she finally got him on the phone a month later and asked why he had ended things without a word, he simply said, "I have no idea what you mean," and hung up. She never heard from him again. Around this same time, Ted stopped going to his law school classes. By April, he had stopped attending entirely. In the Pacific Northwest, young women had begun to disappear. In January 1974, around the time Ted Bundy stopped talking to Stephanie Brooks and stopped going to law school, he committed his first documented violent attack. Very late at night on January 4th, he went into the basement apartment of an 18-year-old woman named Karen Sparks in Seattle. Karen was a dancer and a student at the University of Washington. She was asleep in her bed. Ted hit her in the head with a metal rod that he took from her bed frame. He then used the same rod to sexually assault her, causing terrible internal injuries. Karen was found the next morning and taken to the hospital. She stayed unconscious for 10 days. She survived, but the attack left her with permanent brain damage and problems with her vision and hearing. About a month later, in the early morning hours of February 1st, Ted broke into another basement apartment. This one belonged to 21-year-old Linda and Healy, also a University of Washington student. Linda had a part-time job giving weather reports for skiers on the radio. Ted hit her in the head while she slept, making her unconscious. He then dressed her in jeans, a white blouse, and boots, and carried her out of her apartment. He later told people that he drove her to a faraway place, raped and killed her, and then left her body there. Over the next several months, young women started to disappear at a rate of about one per month. On March 12th, 19-year-old Donna Gail Manson left her dorm room at a college in Olympia, Washington, to go to a jazz concert on campus. She never arrived. Years later, Ted claimed he burned her skull in his girlfriend Elizabeth's fireplace. On April 17th, 18-year-old Susan Rancourt vanished from a college in Ellensburg, Washington. She was walking back to her dorm after a meeting. After she disappeared, 2 other female students told police that a man with his arm in a sling had asked them for help carrying books to his brown Volkswagen Beetle. One of them had seen this man on the very night Susan disappeared. On May 6th, 22-year-old Roberta Parks left her dorm at Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon. She was going to meet friends for coffee but never got there. Ted later said he saw her in a cafeteria and convinced her to go to a bar with him. Instead, he tied her up in his car and drove her back to Washington, raping her twice during the drive before killing her. On June 1st, 22-year-old Brenda Ball disappeared from a tavern parking lot in Burien, Washington, near the Seattle airport. People last saw her talking to a man with his arm in a sling. Ted said he took her to his place, where they had sex, and then he strangled her while she was sleeping. In the early morning hours of June 11th, 18-year-old Georgianne Hawkins vanished while walking through a brightly lit alley behind her sorority house at the University of Washington. She was on her way back from her boyfriend's dorm. Ted later told a detective that he had pretended to have difficulty carrying a briefcase and asked Georgianne for help getting it to his car. When she helped him, he hit her with a crowbar and handcuffed her. He drove her to a place east of Seattle called Issaquah, where he strangled her. He spent the whole night there with her body. The next day, he returned to the alley where he had taken her. Police were all over the area investigating her disappearance. Ted calmly walked into a nearby parking lot, picked up one of her shoes and her earrings, which he had left there, and left without anyone noticing. He later went back to visit Georgianne's body 3 times. After Georgianne disappeared, more witnesses came forward. They said they had seen a man using crutches, and with a leg cast in the alley that night. One woman said the man asked her to help him carry a briefcase to his light brown Volkswagen Beetle. During this same period, Ted was working in Olympia for a state government agency. He even wrote a pamphlet giving women advice on how to prevent rape. He also met a new woman there named Carolyn Boone, who would become important in his life later. The crimes in Washington reached a peak on July 14, 1974. It was a Sunday at Lake Sammamish State Park in Issaquah, a popular beach area crowded with people. In broad daylight, a man with his left arm in a sling and wearing white tennis clothes started talking to women. He introduced himself as Ted. He said he needed help loading a sailboat onto his tan Volkswagen Beetle. Four women described this man to police. 3 of them refused his request. One went with him as far as his car, saw there was no sailboat, and ran away. Around noon, 23-year-old Janice was seen leaving the beach with this same Ted. About 4 hours later, 19-year-old Denise Naslund left her picnic to go to the restroom and never returned. Both women were gone. Their skeletal remains were found 2 months later near a service road not far from the park. A few months after that, the skulls and jawbones of 4 more missing women, Linda Healy, Susan Rancourt, Roberta Parks, and Brenda Ball, were found on a mountain east of Issaquah. Donna Manson's body was never found. Police in Seattle now had a good description of the suspect and his car. They made a sketch and put it in the newspapers and on TV. Several people who knew Ted, including his girlfriend Elizabeth, a co-worker, and a professor, recognized the sketch and the car. They called the police to report him as a possible suspect. But the detectives found it hard to believe that a law student with no criminal record as an adult could be responsible for so many violent crimes. They received hundreds of tips and did not focus on Ted right away. In August 1974, Ted moved to Salt Lake City, Utah, to start law school at the University of Utah. He left Elizabeth in Seattle but still called her often. In Utah, he started a new string of attacks and murders. On September 2nd, he picked up a hitchhiker in Idaho. He raped and strangled her. He came back the next day to take pictures of her body and cut it up before throwing the pieces in a river. On October 2nd, he kidnapped 16-year-old Nancy Wilcox in a Salt Lake City suburb. He forced her into his car at knife point and took her to his apartment. He later said he buried her body far to the south, but it was never found. On October 18th, Melissa Smith, the 17-year-old daughter of a local police chief, disappeared after leaving a pizza place. Her naked body was found 9 days later in the mountains. She had been beaten, raped, and strangled. The medical examiner believed she may have been kept alive for almost a week before she died. On October 31st, another 17-year-old named Laura vanished from a town south of Salt Lake City after leaving a Halloween party. Her naked body was found on Thanksgiving Day in a canyon. She had also been beaten, raped, and strangled. Years later, Ted described going back to the bodies of Melissa and Laura. He said he washed Melissa's hair and put makeup on Laura's face. On November 8th, Ted used a new trick. At a shopping mall in Murray, Utah, he approached 18-year-old Carol Duranch. He told her he was a police officer named Officer Roseland. He said someone had tried to break into her car and asked her to come with him to the police station. Carol got into his Volkswagen. Soon, she realized they were not driving toward the police station. Ted pulled over and tried to handcuff her. They struggled, and Ted accidentally locked both handcuffs on the same wrist. Carol was able to open the car door and run away to safety. Later that same evening, 17-year-old Deborah Kent disappeared from a high school in Bountiful, Utah, north of Salt Lake City. She had left a school play to pick up her brother. A teacher and a student at the school told police they had seen a strange man that night. The man had asked them to come to the parking lot to look at his car. Outside the school auditorium, police found a key. It was a key that unlocked the handcuffs that had been put on Carol Duranch. Ted later admitted that he had taken Deborah Kent and kept her at his apartment for a day, saying she was alive for half of that time. In November, Elizabeth called the police in Seattle again. She had read that young women were disappearing near Salt Lake City, where Ted now lived. She told them all her suspicions again. The detectives in Seattle listened more carefully this time. In December, Elizabeth called the police in Salt Lake City as well and told them the same things. Ted's name was now on their list of suspects. In January 1975, Ted returned to Seattle to visit Elizabeth for a week. She did not tell him that she had called the police about him. In early 1975, Ted started killing in Colorado. On January 12th, 23-year-old Karen Campbell, a nurse, disappeared from a hotel in Snowmass Village, Colorado. She was walking down a hallway to her room. Her naked body was found a month later near a road outside the resort. She had been hit in the head with a blunt object. On March 15th, a ski instructor named Julie Cunningham disappeared in Vail, Colorado. Ted later said he had approached her on crutches and asked for help carrying his ski boots. He then clubbed her, handcuffed her, and took her to another place to sexually assault and kill her. He drove all the way back from Salt Lake City weeks later just to visit her body. On April 6th, 25-year-old Denise Oliverson disappeared while riding her bike to her parents' house in Grand Junction, Colorado. Her bike and sandals were found under a bridge. Ted later said he killed her and threw her body in the Colorado River. On May 6th, in Pocatello, Idaho, he saw 12-year-old Lynette Culver walking alone near her school. He lured her into his car and took her to his hotel room. There, he raped her and drowned her in the bathtub. He threw her body in a river. On June 28th, 15-year-old Susan Curtis vanished from the campus of Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. Her murder was the last one he ever confessed to, speaking about it just before his execution years later. The bodies of Nancy Wilcox, Deborah Kent, Julie Cunningham, Denise Oliverson, Lynette Culver, and Susan Curtis were never found. In August 1975, Ted was baptized into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, even though he did not really follow the church's rules. Back in Washington, police were still working on the cases from the year before. They started using a computer to try to find connections. They put in lists of names, people who knew the victims, people who owned Volkswagen Beetles, people named Ted, and known sex offenders. The computer showed them 26 names that appeared on all the lists. One of those names was Ted Bundy. He was now at the very top of their list of suspects. Then, they got word from Utah that he had been arrested there. On August 16, 1975, a police officer in a Salt Lake City suburb stopped Ted's Volkswagen Beetle late at night. The officer noticed Ted driving slowly through a neighborhood and speeding away when he saw the police car. When the officer searched the car, he found a ski mask, a mask made from pantyhose, a crowbar, handcuffs, trash bags, rope, and an ice pick. Ted said the ski mask was for skiing. He had found the handcuffs in a trash can, and the other items were just normal things to have in a car. But the police remembered the description of the man who had attacked Carol Duranch. They searched Ted's apartment and found a guide to Colorado ski resorts with a check mark by the hotel where Karen Campbell had disappeared. They also found a brochure for the high school play in Bountiful, where Deborah Kent had vanished. The police did not have enough to hold him, so they let him go, but they placed him under 24-hour surveillance. Detectives flew to Seattle to talk to Elizabeth again. She told them many strange things about Ted. She said she had found crutches, plaster for making casts, and a meat cleaver that he never used for cooking. She found surgical gloves and a bag of women's clothing. She knew Ted was always in debt and suspected he stole almost everything he owned. She told them that Ted would sometimes wake her up in the middle of the night and use a flashlight to look at her body under the covers. He also kept a heavy wrench, with tape wrapped around the handle, in the trunk of her car. The detectives realized that Ted was always with Elizabeth on the nights the women in Washington had disappeared, but he was not with her on the days the women had been taken from Lake Sammamish. In September 1975, Ted sold his Volkswagen Beetle. The police immediately took the car and searched it. In the car, FBI technicians found hairs. They matched these hairs to samples taken from Karen Campbell's body. Later, they found more hairs that matched Melissa Smith and Carol Duranch. An FBI expert said it would be an extremely rare coincidence for one car to have hairs from 3 different women who did not know each other. In October, police put Ted in a lineup. Carol Duranch looked at the men and immediately pointed at Ted, identifying him as Officer Roseland. Other witnesses from the high school in Bountiful also recognized him as the strange man they had seen there. The police now had enough evidence to charge Ted with kidnapping and attacking Carol Duranch. He was arrested and put in jail, but his parents paid his bail, and he was released until his trial. In February 1976, Ted stood trial in Utah for the Duranch kidnapping. He decided not to have a jury because the case had been in the news so much. After a 4-day trial, the judge found him guilty. In June, he was sentenced to 1 to 15 years in the Utah State Prison. In October, while in prison, he was found hiding in some bushes in the prison yard with maps, airline schedules, and a fake ID card. He was trying to escape. He was caught and put in solitary confinement. Later that same month, the state of Colorado charged him with the murder of Karen Campbell. In January 1977, he was moved from Utah to a jail in Aspen, Colorado, to wait for his trial there. On June 7, 1977, Ted was in the courthouse in Aspen for a hearing. Because he was acting as his own lawyer, the judge allowed him to not wear handcuffs. During a break, Ted asked to go to the law library in the courthouse. While he was in the library, he opened a window and jumped out from the 2nd floor. He landed hard and hurt his ankle, but he ran away into the mountains. He was free. He broke into a cabin and stole food and clothes. He wandered in the mountains for 6 days, cold and in pain, before he stole a car and drove back into Aspen. 2 police officers saw his car driving badly and pulled him over. He had been a fugitive for 6 days and was caught again. After he was back in jail, this time in a different Colorado town, Ted started planning another escape. He got a hacksaw blade from another prisoner. He lost a lot of weight, about 35 pounds. At night, when other prisoners were in the shower, he used the blade to cut a hole in the ceiling of his cell. He was small enough now to squeeze through the hole and crawl around in the space above the ceiling. On the night of December 30th, 1977, he put books and files in his bed and covered them with a blanket to look like he was sleeping. Then he climbed through the hole. He broke through the ceiling into the apartment of the main jailer, who was not home. He changed into the jailer's clothes, walked out the front door, and was free again. He stole a car, but it broke down. A driver gave him a ride, and he caught a bus to Denver. From Denver, he flew to Chicago. The people at the jail did not realize he was gone until noon the next day, more than 17 hours after he left. By then, Ted was already in Chicago. From Chicago, Ted took a train to Michigan. He stole another car and drove south to Atlanta, Georgia. Then he took a bus to Tallahassee, Florida. He arrived in Tallahassee on January 8, 1978. He rented a room near the Florida State University campus, using a fake name. He told people later that he wanted to find a real job and not commit any more crimes. But he soon went back to stealing. He shoplifted and stole money and credit cards from women's purses at grocery stores. Just 1 week after arriving in Tallahassee, in the early morning hours of January 15, 1978, Ted entered the Chi Omega sorority house near the university. He went in through a back door that did not lock properly. Around 2:45 a.m., he picked up a piece of oak firewood. He went into the bedroom of 21-year-old Margaret Bowman, who was sleeping. He hit her in the head with the wood, then strangled her with a nylon stocking. He then went into the bedroom of 20-year-old Lisa Levy. He beat her unconscious, strangled her, and bit her very hard on her buttock. He then sexually assaulted her with a bottle. In the next bedroom, he attacked 21-year-old Kathy Kleiner, breaking her jaw and cutting her shoulder badly. He also attacked 21-year-old Karen Chandler, who suffered a broken jaw, a concussion, and crushed fingers. Both Kathy and Karen survived. The attacks on 4 women in the sorority house took less than 15 minutes. More than 30 people were sleeping nearby, and no one heard anything. After leaving the sorority house, Ted walked 8 blocks away and broke into another apartment. Inside was 21-year-old Cheryl Thomas, another student. He beat her as she slept, dislocating her shoulder and fracturing her jaw and skull in 5 places. She survived, but the attack left her permanently deaf in one ear and damaged her sense of balance, ending her dream of becoming a dancer. About 3 weeks later, on February 8th, Ted drove to Jacksonville, Florida. He approached a 14-year-old girl named Leslie Parmenter in a parking lot. He pretended to be a firefighter, but her older brother arrived and scared him away. The next morning, February 9th, he was in Lake City, Florida. He drove a stolen van to Lake City Junior High School. Inside the school, 12-year-old Kimberly Leach was called out of her classroom by a teacher to get her purse, which she had forgotten. She left the room and was never seen alive again. 7 weeks later, her partially preserved body was found in a shed near a state park, far from the school. The medical examiner said she had been sexually assaulted and her throat had been cut. On February 12th, Ted stole another car in Tallahassee and drove west across Florida. 3 days later, at around 1 a.m., a police officer in Pensacola, Florida, stopped a Volkswagen Beetle. A check showed the car was stolen. When the officer told Ted he was under arrest, Ted kicked the officer's legs and tried to run. The officer chased him, tackled him, and after a struggle, managed to handcuff him. In the stolen car, police found stolen credit cards, stolen IDs belonging to female college students, and a stolen television set. As the officer drove his prisoner to the jail, not yet knowing who he had caught, he heard Ted say, "I wish you had killed me." When the police officer in Pensacola arrested Ted Bundy on February 15, 1978, he did not immediately know who he had caught. Bundy was using a fake name. But after he was taken to the jail, the police ran his fingerprints. They quickly learned that he was Theodore Bundy, a man who had escaped from jail in Colorado and was on the FBI's list of 10 most wanted fugitives. He was now a suspect in the attacks at the Chi Omega sorority house and the disappearance of Kimberly Leach in Florida. Investigators from all over the country began to come to Florida. They wanted to question Bundy about murders in their states. Bundy was held in jail with no chance of bail. In May 1978, a grand jury in Florida officially charged him with the murders of Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, as well as the attempted murders of the other women attacked at the sorority house and in the nearby apartment. He would stand trial first for these crimes. The trial for the Chi Omega murders began in June 1979 in Miami, Florida. The courtroom was full of reporters. It was one of the first murder trials to be shown on television across the country. Bundy decided to act as his own lawyer again, even though he also had a team of lawyers to help him. This made the trial very difficult and confusing. The prosecutors presented their evidence step by step. A woman named Nita Neary, who lived in the Chi Omega house, testified that she saw a man leave the house on the night of the murders. She said he was holding something that looked like a club. She pointed to Bundy in the courtroom and identified him as that man. Another important piece of evidence was a bite mark. The killer had bitten Lisa Levy on her buttock. A dentist who was an expert in bite marks, Dr. Richard Suverin, showed the jury how he had compared the bite mark to casts of Bundy's teeth. He explained that the marks matched Bundy's teeth exactly. The jury also heard from Carol Duranch, the woman Bund had kidnapped in Utah. She told the story of how he had tricked her and how she had escaped. This showed the jury that Bundy had used similar tricks to hurt other women before. After hearing all the evidence, the jury took less than 7 hours to decide. On July 24, 1979, they found Ted Bundy guilty of the 2 murders and of the attacks on the other women. The judge, Edward Cowart, then had to decide the punishment. He sentenced Bundy to death in the electric chair for the murders. As he gave the sentence, Judge Cowart told Bundy that he was a bright young man, but had gone down the wrong path, and he wished him well. Bundy showed no emotion. Bundy still had to face a second trial in Florida. This was for the murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. The trial took place in Orlando, Florida, in January 1980. Once again, Bundy acted as his own lawyer. This time, the key evidence came from an eyewitness. A man who was at the Lake City Junior High School on the day Kimberly disappeared testified that he saw a man leading a young girl to a white van. He identified Bundy as that man. There was also important physical evidence. Scientists examined fibers from the clothes Bundy was wearing when he was arrested. They found that these fibers matched fibers found on Kimberly's clothing and in the stolen van. The match was very rare. It proved that Bundy had been in contact with Kimberly. The jury found Bundy guilty of first-degree murder. The judge again sentenced him to death. During this second trial, something unusual happened. Carolyn Boone, the woman Bundy had met years earlier in Washington state, came to Florida to support him. She still believed he was innocent. They had stayed in touch, and she had moved to Florida to be near him. During the trial, while Boone was on the witness stand, Bundy asked her to marry him. She said yes. According to an old Florida law, a marriage declared in court in front of a judge was legal. Bundy and Boone were now husband and wife. In 1981, Boone gave birth to their daughter in prison. After the trials, Bundy was sent to Florida State Prison to wait on death row. For years, his lawyers filed appeals to try to stop the execution. While he waited, Bundy started talking. He agreed to speak with investigators from Washington State, Utah, and Colorado who were still trying to solve their own murder cases. He also spoke with writers and with an FBI agent named Bill Hagmaier. At first, he talked about the crimes in a general way, as if he was describing someone else. But slowly, he began to confess to more and more murders. In the mid-1980s, Bundy also spoke with detectives from Washington State who were trying to catch another serial killer, the one known as the Green River Killer. He offered to help them understand how a serial killer thinks. The detectives, Robert Keppel and Dave Reichert, spent many hours talking with him. Bundy did not help them catch the Green River Killer, but he gave them insight into his own crimes. He told them how he would revisit the bodies of his victims, sometimes many times, and how he felt a sense of complete possession over them. He admitted that he had decapitated some of his victims with a saw and had kept some of their heads in his apartment for a time. As the years passed and his appeals failed, Bundy's execution date got closer. In the last few days of his life, he began to confess in detail to specific murders. He wanted to delay his execution by offering new information. He would tell investigators about a victim, but then hold back key details like where the body was buried, hoping they would ask for more time to find it. This plan did not work. The governor of Florida, Bob Martinez, said he would not delay the execution just so Bundy could trade information for time. On the day before his execution, January 23, 1989, Bundy confessed to 30 murders in total. He named victims in Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, Idaho, and Florida. He admitted to killing the women from Lake Sammamish, the college students in Washington, the young women in Utah, the 12-year-old girl in Idaho, and the 3 women in Florida. He also confessed to several murders where the victims had never been identified. He told investigators that the actual number of people he killed could be higher. He said that some murders he would never talk about because they were committed too close to his home or involved very young victims. That same day, he also gave a long interview to a psychologist named James Dobson. In this interview, Bundy blamed his crimes on violent pornography. He said that looking at pornographic magazines and books had made him want to commit more and more violent acts. Many people who knew Bundy, including Enrule and the lawyers who worked with him, believed this was just another lie. They thought he was trying to blame something else for his actions instead of taking responsibility himself. On the morning of January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was led to the electric chair at Florida State Prison in Rayford. He did not ask for a special last meal. His last words were simple. He said goodbye to his lawyer and to a minister who was with him. He asked them to give his love to his family and friends. At 7:16 a.m., he was pronounced dead. Outside the prison, a large crowd of people had gathered. They cheered, sang, and set off fireworks when they learned the execution had been carried out. Bundy's body was taken away. He was cremated in Gainesville, Florida. According to his will, his ashes were scattered in the Cascade Mountains in Washington state, a place where he had spent time and where the remains of several of his victims had been found years before. Theodore Bundy, who had caused so much pain and death, was gone, and the case was finally closed.